Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Tanvir Shanawaz, and I'm honored to be your MC today. You have joined the Taylor Massey Oak Ridge Community Response Team's virtual seminar on the effects of domestic violence on mental health. It is an honor for me to be here, and I am so grateful to be given the opportunity to introduce you to some wonderful speakers who will be sharing some much needed insight. And I think we can all appreciate at the end of this that it will be the first of many important conversations that we can all hope to inspire to have amongst ourselves as we continue going forward. Now, a little quickly about the Taylor Massey Oak Ridge Community Response Team. I am also privileged to be the co-chair of that, along with my co-chair Razia Rashid. And it is a wonderful volunteer-led community organization that was started at the height of the pandemic in an effort to promote public health with the very important nuances and experiences that many of the marginalized communities living in Toronto, across Ontario, and indeed in Canada are very much always experiencing. Through this, we have been able to achieve wonderful accomplishments, such as vaccinating tens of thousands of residents. We have promoted public health across dozens of different languages. We have a roster of community ambassadors that I would imagine are quite envious to anyone who asks in terms of all that we have been doing on the ground. And it is with great pleasure by securing East Effort relief funding that we, as the Taylor Massey Oak Ridge Community Response Team, or TMOCRT for short, I know that's a mouthful, are so honored to be able to present with you this incredible and important conversation. I would like to also acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and we are now home to many diverse First Nations and Inuit and Métis peoples that we share the land with. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaties, signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. Now, I would also like to emphasize that we are going to be talking about some difficult topics. This webinar includes subjects that may be triggering to individuals and families who have experienced domestic violence, mental health episodes, or other past traumatic experiences. If you feel triggered, please stop watching the webinar, take a quick break, have a glass of water, or call your medical or social service provider. You may return to the program of the webinar if you feel better. And at this time, I'd also like to share with you some wonderful resources that will be shared with everyone who has pre-registered by their email address, where our network, along with our adjacent service agencies and community organizations, have worked tirelessly behind the scenes to promote some accessible and easy to read and easily shareable community resources. If I may, I am sharing the community responses page that outlines some very important resources that are available across many platforms by email, by phone, as well as by text. So I encourage each and every one of you, once you're provided with this, to just like us, continuing sharing the word with your neighbors, with your friends, and whoever may be able to access and support. Now, with that, I am so honored to be able to introduce our speakers. And we first have Diana Ali D'Souza. And she is going to be talking about domestic violence and affecting women's mental health. And so at this time, I'd like Diana to please take it away.
Thank you so much. Good evening, members of the audience, to our amazing panelists and moderators. Tanvir, I speak as a survivor, as a group called One Voice, of an incredible team of women from many faiths and cultures, and an imam, our very own brother, Urshad Osman, as well as I speak as an activist and advocate. Happy Nowruz to all those celebrating today. This evening is one of the toughest, most grueling topics we as a panel address. As a survivor, although memories long gone, more than 30 years ago, as a woman, the scars are hidden and the memories have faded away. and gradually I am transformed into a tough, resilient woman. Even as I prepared for this presentation, I cringed and my scars opened up from all the torment that was inescapable. How do you escape? Where can we go without all the resources and necessities to start over again? As a young girl, and I'm sure you all had a similar dream like me, that someday we would make a name for ourselves and hopefully meet a charming, tall, dark, handsome man, or lighter skinned, depending on your race and culture. Yes, that dream did come true. I forgot to add to that list compassionate, caring, loving, and harmonious. My marriage started with an infatuated love affair. Slowly, the pattern of abuse began, and I remember my first violent episode, retaliating as I was brought up by a family who liberated me to fight for my rights, be brave, and face the world. And so I was sent off to school in London, England to do just that, complete my studies, and leave my indelible mark on this world. Those were their words, and it remains one today as a mighty warrior taking the plight of humanity. Little did I realize that my journey took new twists and turns, curved balls thrown my way, realizing that my partner was not just charming. He had a violent temper, and his rage was frightening. As I faced my first big fight with him, I fought back, letting him know that my father never raised a hand on me. My defiance only exasperated the situation into an unforgettable memory. He beating me till I was black and blue. It just got worse, if not a day later, a week after, or beyond for years. You see, domestic violence can take many forms, including emotional, sexual, physical abuse, and threats of abuse. Sadly, I faced all these forms of abuse. It took nearly 14 years of abuse as I journeyed from London, England to Guyana, and finally Canada. I used to run away sometimes with my youngest baby, sometimes all three. But who would keep you for longer than a few days? I returned home, welcome back to the honeymoon stage until the next episode, and the cycle only repeated itself. One day, I was called into my associate dean's office. You see, I worked at the University of Toronto Medical School, and most of our decanal team were renowned physicians and specialists. My dean sat me down and calmly claimed that the staff were concerned with endless and repetitive wounds on me. I justified those noticeable scars as falling down. In his kind, compassionate demeanor, he bluntly shared his diagnosis: I am being abused. And his wise, impactful words, which I often share with victims of violence, and I paraphrase his statement: I too was as much the enabler of abuse. If my kids were prone to witness the pain, suffering, trauma they silently and terrifyingly bore, the scars themselves. This kind dean left $500 on my desk and got his senior team to place me in a secure space. You see, in my days, if you laid a complaint at a police station, the perpetrator was given a warning and sent home, naturally with more rage. During those days, funding was in shelter homes were exponentially cut by one of the premiers of Ontario in the 70s, and that's where I do ha- have issues how we take care of our children when there are no shelter homes. This compassionate team of staff found a way to gather sufficient funds for me to move to a new place, recording in their financial books that these funds were owed to me as overtime. I did put in a long day, and to them, I deservedly should have received overtime funds. Immediately, as a staff was urged to drive me home, gather my stuff in garbage bags, and took me to a supervisor's place, a single mom herself, who once faced her own perils. That's not the end of the story, but the journey only just began with tremendous heartaches, and I had to face life over. Thankfully, to the support systems, which some of us, I'm sorry, I've got other notes, which some of us have to bear. Um, I truly am grateful to my team who made me who I am today. This caring, compassionate team found a way to gather sufficient funds for me to move to a new place, recording in their financial book that these were funds owed to me as overtime. I did put in a long day, and to them, as deservedly, should have received these funds. Immediately, a staff was urged to drive me home, gather my stuff in garbage bags, and took me to my supervisor's place, a single mom herself who once fought her own perils. That's not the end of the story, for the journey beyond was filled with tremendous heartaches, control being the theme of my partner, refusing to let me have my kids. Thankfully, to the incredible support system, which some of our panelists will share, ample community services, and a legal system fought for my rights, I managed to get my kids and reignite our lives. And through therapy, we began to heal mentally and physically. Please don't hang on to a toxic life. Find a way out like me. I want to share a few excerpts from a personal story I wrote along with many co authors that became a best selling book of anthologies called Shine Like a Diamond, Compelling Stories of Life Victories. I wrote the foreword as well. Here is a part of the excerpt showcasing briefly my trials and tribulations. I looked to God, saying, "Why me, Lord? Why did life treat me so unkindly?" I was ridden with shame, guilt, resentment, and regret. It took years to reshape our emotional thought pattern, my kids as well. But I now believe that no matter where you've been and no matter how badly life treats you, there is always a way out. Renowned Carl Jung once said, and I quote, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens. When we look outside, our true heart awakes." End of quote. I realized then I needed to reframe my vision, refuel my passion and purpose in life. I had to get rid of all the pointless drama. I was a diamond in the rough, inspired by its meaning that from an adage or metaphor, a diamond is made from gold, not worth much of anything except for its fire. Only if a tremendous amount of pressure is applied can coal become a diamond. I now live, breathe a mantra. You might not end up exactly where you intended to go, but you will eventually arrive precisely where you need to be, and I did accomplish this. At the back of my book, I excerpt my words. Every woman deserves to feel accepted, loved, and treasured, much like a diamond is treated, glistening. So then it is up to women to recognize the great and priceless value we possess within us. I made a commitment to myself that took control. I promised to work on lovingly accepting all flaws and imperfections, pledging to make the best out of experiences life sent my way, whether good or bad, and make every moment count in a positive, uplifting way, especially for my children. I soon began letting go of all toxic thoughts and self defeating expectations, behaviors, and people who were holding me back in life. Something in me awakened, as if a bigger force and a more powerful than me took over my headspace, guiding light that kept me safe and protected at all times. I took charge of the next stage of my journey. No more excuses that life will get better in marriage. I was better off outside of it. I began to excel in my own professional and personal life. This cathartic process took on a whole new meaning and purpose. Like a butterfly, I quote an unknown source: let go of the past, trust the future, embrace change, come out of the cocoon, unfurl your wings, dare to get off the ground, ride the breezes, savor the flowers, put on the brightest colors, let your beauty shine. From hopelessness to hopefulness, it was cathartic. Like the butterfly who came out of its cocoon, I too did. Yes, mental health affects us, no doubt, in abusive environments and beyond the scars, often weeping with emotional grief. Yet gradually, through healing process, new beginnings will come your way. Thankfully, my kids and I sought therapy, and life began with a new faith and hope. I broke the mold and re-transformed the person I am today, bettering the lives of my children who today are role models, married to loving partners. They are truly wonderful parents, and as a doting grandma, I'm in awe with the example of a loving relationship and family. Now I am being mentored by my 9 terrific grandkids, aged 13 to 27, who are kind, caring, altruistic, and generous to each other, their extended loved ones, friends, and colleagues. I end with this message from the words of William Penn: I shall pass this day but once, and any good or kindness I can show, let me do it now. Let me not defer or neglect it, for I will never pass this way again. Let's not point to people in the right direction. Let's walk with them in solidarity. Blessings to each of you, and thank you to all the men that raised the sail for women to be loved and nurtured. Namaste.
Thank you so much for that, Diana. Thank you for your bravery. Thank you for your profound passion and dedication. It goes without saying that you are a recipient of the Order of Ontario because of your incredible contributions, and that through your lived experiences and you leveraging, the hurdles that you experienced yourself in medical school, that it has left a legacy at the University of Toronto's medical school, where you helped to establish trauma building support systems. And of course, we can't also ignore that you are now retired, but have kept yourself busy as you founded a global not-for-profit organization doing wonders across the world, called Access Empowerment Council. Diana, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Thank you so much for sharing your wonderful insight, your bravery with your experiences, and hoping that we can continue on with all of our panelists with the important conversations that our communities need to embrace, and so that we can heal, we can look after one another, and that we can continue staying resilient. Thank you again, Diana. Now, at this time, I'm also very honored to introduce our next speaker, Margaret at One Voice. Will be discussing the very important and measurable links between domestic violence and how it affects the behavior of children. Diana, thank you so much for joining us tonight, and I really look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Good evening, everyone. On behalf of One Voice, I'd like to share some of my experiences in dealing with my own child during the time I lived with a violent partner, as well as some situations that I dealt with over my 40-year teaching career when I encountered students who were witnessing and experiencing violence in their homes. I stayed in a situation of abuse for 10 years, and one night I was forced to flee as he had a meltdown, and I knew that I could not stay 1 minute longer. I was truly afraid for me and my child. I have asked myself, and have asked by others many times, why I stayed. As a survivor of domestic violence, I've experienced both physical and psychological trauma, depression, anxiety, PTSD, and many other health issues such as autoimmune disease, sleep disorders, and visible scars. Before I left, when I was seeking help and advice, many said that I should stay in the situation for the sake of my child. They said, Every child needs a father. This was common thinking of the time and is sadly still the common thinking of our time. No matter how horrible that father was, that a woman should stay in a situation for the sake of the child and families. After having heard this bad advice for many years, I began to wonder whether or not my child really needed a father such as the one he had on a day when my ex stormed out of the house angrily on his way to work. He had been screaming at both me and my son for something trivial. I can't remember what. He was always doing that. We never knew what would set him off. My son and I were both crying, and as my ex sped away, my 4-year-old son took me by the hand and he said, "Mommy, I don't care if my dad never comes home from work. I hate him. He's a bad dad. We don't need him. We'll be okay without him. Just you and me, okay?" When I heard these words coming from the mouth of my 4-year-old, I began to question the advice of these well-meaning people about a child needing a father. On another occasion, I had a hospital appointment. I had left our son at home. When I returned, his father was passed out in the bedroom and the house was very, very quiet. The bathroom door was closed, and when I opened it, our son was there in a corner, huddled up in a towel, and he was shaking and whimpering. I asked him what had happened, and he said, "Dad was really mad at me, so I'm hiding because I'm scared." I then asked him how long he'd been hiding, and he said he didn't know, but that my ex had started yelling shortly after I had left, so that is when he'd hidden himself. When I'd left my ex behind forever, my young son started to tell me about all the times he'd been afraid when he was alone with his dad, especially when they were in the car and his dad would speed through stoplights and drive in front of trains and big tanker trucks, weave in and out of traffic. Before I left the situation, if I drove my son to his preschool, his teacher said he'd have a good day and he'd play happily. But if my ex drove, my son would sit in a corner and read and not even respond. The school noted that after I had left his father, my son started to make friends and interact with them daily. I left this domestic violence in time to change my son's behavior to the abuse he experienced and witnessed when he was still young. I felt it was important to give him the psychological support that he needed through counseling, peer mentors, and being physically active. He did struggle. He was experiencing loss, and children cannot express feelings in words. This loss caused conflicting feelings in him, relief and grief at the same time. So working through these emotions with the help of counseling was very important. Today, he is a successful and peaceful adult with a university education and a happy, intimate relationship. For some children, however, this is not always the outcome or the situation. As a teacher, I dealt with teenagers whose parents stayed in situations of domestic violence. These students struggled with numerous health conditions, amongst many other challenges. One student had intervened when his drunken father beat both his mother and his younger brother. His father then turned on him, while the younger brother and mother fled out an open window, resulting in the student coming to school with a badly bruised face and a black eye. Children's services were called. Unfortunately, conditions at home worsened, and the student became depressed, suicidal, and completed the school year in a psychiatric care ward. Tragically, another student told me that she and her mother were constantly abused by their father, and that she was terrified to come home with less than 100% on any assignment. In her final year, she was brutally attacked by her father because her grades had not met his expectations. After recovering from the physical wounds, she spent another 6 months in a psychiatric unit, unable to graduate with her peers. She was so traumatized that she could not consider going to university after high school. The tragic violence at home had been going on for years without any kind of intervention from the community. Domestic violence is complicated. Some abusers appear to be good fathers while abusing the mothers of the children. This confuses children. They sense that something is wrong, and they likely have witnessed incidents and exchanges which were violent, even if the mother tries to hide these. They cannot understand why their father seems to be so nice to them and so mean to their mother. Their loyalties are divided between feelings for their mother and respect for their father, making it more difficult for the children. First slide, please. Children cannot unsee what they have seen or unhear what they have heard. But since they cannot understand what may be happening and do not have the words to express it, they will demonstrate their feelings in different ways. Preschoolers may revert to behaviors below their age level, such as bedwetting, thumb-sucking, whining, crying excessively, and wanting attention, have trouble sleeping, nightmares, hide, or have separation anxiety. They may isolate themselves or hide, cover their ears or head during loud noises. School-age children frequently have feelings of self-doubt or guilt, low self-esteem, and body image problems, may have few friends or have no desire to make friends or socialize, feel isolated, may have tummy aches or headaches, and not want to go to school or come out of their rooms. Adolescents often act out with family, friends, and teachers. They may have attendance problems, engage in risky behaviors, such as using alcohol or drugs, have unprotected sex, or have an online or gaming addiction. Low self-esteem or body image problems, such as bulimia or anorexia, may provoke fighting or be the victim of bullying, have trouble with the law, be depressed, suicidal, or have PSD and anxiety. Our goal as parents should be to protect our children from the effects of domestic violence and violence against women. Get them out of a dangerous situation and into safety. If children continue to witness or experience domestic violence, they become part of a vicious cycle as either victims or perpetrators. In addition to getting out physically, it is important to get them out emotionally by providing counseling and support and teaching them coping strategies to deal with the trauma. Most parents want their children to be successful and to develop without the fear, memory, or threat of violence in the home, and to create citizens who are happy, peaceful, and responsible adults, comfortable with themselves in their own skin. Next slide, please. There is no benefit to our children by staying in a situation of domestic violence. Children cannot process what is happening to them or to their parents when they witness or experience domestic violence. We owe it to them to give them stability and the chance to break out of the cycle of abuse by ending the cycle before it is entrenched and repeats itself endlessly. It is not easy to leave, but with supportive family, friends, community, and faith leaders, it is possible to create a different reality for ourselves and our children, a reality of peace, hope, and love. Please, I beg you, do your part.
Thank you so much for that, Margaret. Thank you for sharing your experience. Thank you for sharing your lessons. And thank you for really making that messaging very clear, to do your part, to take action, and to appreciate that there is an under-acknowledged aspect to domestic violence, and that's the effects that it has on children. And that, yes, it is complicated. I think that was a very profound articulation of the realities that children have loyalties, and they feel pressured, to come in between, parents of theirs. And so there's definitely confusion for the children. So thank you so much for explaining that in the way that you did. And it also goes without saying that you're a retired teacher, and it is very evident with what you just said that you also rose to become a community leader advocating for your students that went through similar parallels. And so we are happy to hear that you have a new granddaughter as well that you're hoping to spend time with and share your musical talents. as well as your cooking, your gardening, and writing. And so
Yes, indeed.
we really appreciate you taking the time away from doing all of that to be with us today and for sharing all of those important words. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, and you're welcome.
Thank you. Next, I'm also honored to introduce our next speaker. She is Tressa Jules, and she will be highlighting the how we understand the spectrum of mental health risk factors. And I know Tressa is very well versed in this topic, as she is a leading figure in CAMH. And so I'm looking forward to hearing what she has prepared for us. So Tressa, thank you for joining us, and please take it away.
Thank you, Tanvi. I appreciate it. Okay, great. So we're going to be walking through understanding the spectrum of mental health and various risk factors that affect the vulnerability of women and children and how to cope with them. So our mental health isn't that different than our physical health. And to increase our physical fitness, it takes time and intention and determination. And the same holds true for our mental fitness. So to really build up our cognitive muscles of resilience is going to take some time and effort. And I'll be introducing you to the spectrum of mental health right now. And then we'll take a look at some of those coping strategies to build that resilience. So mental health is a state of well-being in which every individual realizes their full potential, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution in their community. So this is our spectrum of mental health here. So this diagram, it illustrates that everyone has mental health, and we're all on the spectrum, ranging from healthy on the left and mental illness on the right, or mental health disorder. And our mental health is not a binary state. So it doesn't mean that we're neither mentally healthy or mentally ill, but rather it lies on this spectrum here. And if we think about our physical health, it's very normal for any of us to experience a headache at any given time, right? And when we do experience that headache, we don't typically jump to the conclusion that the headache is indicative of a brain tumor or cancer or anything like that. But same is true for our mental health. So it's really important for us to understand that it's normal for any of us to move along the spectrum due to the normal ups and downs of life, such as the pandemic as a whole, can be what's happening in the world right now, could be changes at work or lack of stable work, could be looking at relationship issues, childcare issues, financial uncertainty, or if your child is experiencing some learning issues at school. And as we know, the factors are endless, right? So let me use another example. So we know that when we don't get a proper night's sleep due to, it could be a new baby or a child that isn't feeling well, or a dog barking at night, or thinking about personal things or work that's due, all of that keeps us up at night. And we know that a lack of sleep can leave us feeling short-tempered, irritable, tired, overwhelmed, and it makes it very difficult to deal with normal daily challenges that we typically could. And at this point, our mental health may not be suffering, but we might notice that it moves a little bit to the right of the spectrum, but it doesn't mean that we have a mental illness. So much is the same in our life when we have poor physical health. So this could be due to a cold or a sore muscle. And we know that we aren't at our best, but when we do get that good night's sleep, so the baby is sleeping through the night, the dog stops barking, etc., we're able to move now right back to the left side of the spectrum. However, for some of us, when these symptoms go untreated and they accumulate over time, it can begin to interfere with our normal cognitive, personal, and social functioning. And this, in essence, is the diagnosis of a mental illness. So specifically for risk factors that affect our vulnerability when focusing on women and children, the three largest ones would be individual, family, and community. And all of these are based on the social determinants of health and the influence in these differences. So with individual risk factors, we would look at the caregiver's knowledge of the children. We're looking at the relationship the caregiver has with drugs or alcohol, any childhood trauma by the children and by the caregivers as well, or the caregivers and their own mental health issues, which would be biological. Next, we have family risk factors, which looks at who interacts with the children, family communication style. Are these family members present, or are they often distracted? Is there domestic violence in the home? Is there a social support system in place? And then lastly, when we're looking at community or environmental risk factors, we're looking at the school culture or the neighborhood culture. We're looking at poverty. We're looking at the safety of the neighborhood, housing options, or even if there's enough activities and community centers for the children to engage in. Now, what I just listed is not an exhaustive list, and it doesn't mean that there's one factor here that is a risk factor, but due to the normal ups and downs of life, again, we move anywhere on this spectrum. And staying with the example of the headache that I mentioned before, we know that we can take a nap or we can drink water or take a pill to make the headache go away. And same is true for our mental health. We want to make sure that we're looking at those protective factors. Protective factors look at appropriate support, such as your personal supports, any work or community resources. We're looking at personal self-care, such as our diet, sleeping, and mindfulness activities. And lastly, we're looking at treatment. So this can be therapy, any type of medicine you need to take, and learning mindsets as well. So again, not an exhaustive list, but by engaging in these protective factors, we'll be able to mitigate our vulnerability to becoming mentally unwell over time. So very key to keep in mind is that everyone has mental health, but not everyone has a mental illness. And as this diagram illustrates, it ebbs and flows, and we fluctuate on this diagram here. So let's look at those coping strategies now. That's where we want to be. We want to be flourishing. So we want to carve out time for practicing self-care. And I know that sounds like an oxymoron to talk about self-care all the time, but the key to self-care is twofold. So number one, you want to explore as many options as you can for self-care. And number two, you need to carve out the time to be doing self-care activities. And it's the impact of putting your own oxygen mask on for yourself to look after yourself, and then helping your children and other loved ones as well. By engaging in these routines consistently, you'll be able to find yourself being more empathetic towards your child, dealing with some behaviors that typically would irritate you. And the long-term outcomes of this is that your child is able to be self-sufficient, they're able to emotionally regulate themselves, and also work on their creativity. And some practical, concrete examples of self-care can be looking at recognizing that you do need to speak with a therapist, catching up with a friend. You can give your child an activity in another room to complete, or listening to a podcast and things like that. Next, we want to learn to role model healthy behaviors and interactions. And we know this because we know that anything that a child hears, they often repeat. Right? And we want to demonstrate those positive emotions to the child, but also work on how we are articulating to the child as well. And instead of the age-old question, how was your day at school? You can ask them, tell me a word that described how you felt during different parts of the day. And we know that the pandemic has really interrupted this kind of experience, as everything has been pretty negative recently. But by continuing to pay attention to how we feel, we'll be able to help our children articulate. And lastly, we want to access those educational resources and community supports. So again, by being part of this workshop and looking at any YouTube videos or articles about resilience will help in this area. We also want to emphasize CBT, or cognitive behavioral therapy, as one of the most popular forms of therapy. And we also want to talk to any community supports and word of mouth and social media, anywhere where you can find help. As we know, the pandemic has negatively impacted our students for social emotional development, and we don't know to the full extent yet as the research continues to develop. But by building that resilience within our kids, we'll be able to build it in ourselves as well. And our kids are learning life skills and meeting new people and everything that they missed in those past 2 years. And of course, that's good for the parents as well to take those 30 minutes to an hour when they're in those activities like dance, class, music, art. You're able to carve out your time for self-care. And lastly, I just want to share some supports. Here on the left-hand column, we have the, again, talking to a therapist. We have our CAMH line here, crisis text line, Canada Suicide Prevention, and also, of course, our local emergency department. And the programs on the right-hand side are completely free to Ontario residents. We have the first two are, again, cognitive behavioral therapy that you can join online. And the other two, Connect Ontario and Wellness Together Canada, are resources that you can access. I just want to close with this important quotation that I found on the Headspace app, which is used for meditation. It says, we can't always change what's happening around us, but we can change what happens within us. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you so much, Teresa. And if I can just say, I'm particularly appreciative that you went about explaining how it's just the normal ebbs and flows of life, of dealing with financial security, relationships, navigating your own children having learning issues at school. And then I also really appreciated how you mentioned that coping strategies could be as simple as that. And that, as much as we hear self-care, really self-care could be as simple as tuning into a podcast, asking your children if they can explain how their day went by one word. And I think if more of us can appreciate that it's as simple as that, I think we can all be, I can imagine that a lot more of us would be willing to share in our experiences, and we can learn from one another. So thank you so much for doing that. And of course, it goes without saying that you are someone who's been leading, ways to innovate with childcare practices, with developing workshops and after-school programs. You are someone who's been so experienced with nonprofit organizations and are currently a learning and development consultant with the Center for Addiction and Mental Health, otherwise known as CAMH. And I'm sure that your impacts, your ability to explain what often sounds like complicated issues in such an ease as the way that you did, I know has been felt and will continue to be felt. So thank you so much for providing your time, providing your resources, and going through with us what I think is important, which is the bare minimum, the basics of understanding, what is illness, what is health, and how we can address it and identify it. So thank you again, Tressa.
And thank you, Tan. We appreciate it.
Now, at this time, as we move along with our wonderful panel of guests that we've asked to speak, I'm very honored to introduce someone that I'm proud to call a community member, someone I've had the pleasure of helping to organize this along with, and his organization and facilitation of what is tonight's presentation is in large part thanks to his passion and dedication for this subject. And I know as a community leader, he is always going to continue advocating for these important and sometimes difficult conversations. So with that, I'd like to introduce Imam Irshad Osman as he will discuss the role that faith and community leaders can play as they can help to address and support victims of domestic abuse. Thank you so much, Brother Irshad Osman, for joining us, and please take it away.
Thank you, Tanvir, and thanks for all my panelists. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul 'uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli. Rabbi zidni ilma warzuqni fahman wa ilhama. Dear everybody, I have been given this subject of talking about the role of faith and community leaders in addressing domestic violence and supporting the victims. Many of us think that this is a personal issue between husband and wife. And we always justify, we don't know what happened and how to, something has happened in between the family. We can't get involved. We should not meddle with other people's affairs. This is their personal life, etc., etc. Because we come from that cultural background where we don't try to meddle with somebody's personal life because of the patriarchal culture. But as the speakers before me explained really well, it is not just an issue between two individuals, but the social cost, the emotional cost, and the behavioral cost of domestic violence is immense. It affects more than just two people. Needless to say, the spiritual cost and economic cost. Yes, I said economic cost. According to a study done in 2014, intimate partner violence comprises 37% of all violent crimes in Canada, imposing significant economic cost on society. Every year, remember, every year, the financial impact borne by the criminal justice system, like police, court, prosecution, legal aid, correctional services, is almost $320 million. The impact, for the financial impact on the civil justice system, like the protection orders, divorce and separation, child protection, is $225.1 million. And the victim cost is $6 billion. It's a staggering $6 billion. That includes medical attention, lost wages, lost education, damaged property, and pain and suffering. And the third-party cost also involved. That is like the social service operations and productivity losses to employers, negative impact on children, like Margaret mentioned, and the government expenditures. These amounted to $889 million. In total, the economic cost for Canada, as Canadians, the economic cost of domestic violence every year is almost about $7.4 billion. Now you'll see that it's no longer an issue between two individuals. It ultimately extends to anyone who has a relationship to that victim, like children, friends, even the employers. It also extends to persons or entities that have no relationship whatsoever with the victim. There could be a domestic violence happening around in a different city, but everybody is involved with that because of the allocation of public funds. It creates a financial strain that affects the community's health and places the responsibility on all of us to prevent it, and then when and where it does occur, to protect and assist the victims, to hold perpetrators accountable, and to take measures to break the cycle of violence. Many faith and community leaders are not trained. I'm an imam. I'm not trained on how to deal and how to give that support system to a victim of domestic violence, or who is suffering from mental health because of those episodes of domestic violence at home. And yet, data shows 5 out of 10 victims always turn towards their faith leaders, including those who suffer from mental health episodes. It's because of the trust they have placed in our ability to recognize, empathize, and provide spiritual and social guidance, and help to end the violence and create harmony in their family. You see, as an imam, the Islamic paradigm for me is very clear. It says that وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ أَنْ خَلَقَ لَكُم مِّنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ أَزْوَاجًا لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَكُم مَّوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً. Among God's signs is that He created spouses from yourselves for you to live with in tranquility. He ordained love and mercy between you. And in talking about our responsibility, it says, إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَأْمُرُ بِالْعَدْلِ وَالْإِحْسَانِ وَإِيتَاءِ ذِي الْقُرْبَى. Allah commands justice and fair dealing, regardless of who is it. Is that your friend? Is that your relative? Is it a rich person or poor person? Regardless of that, when it comes to justice, you have to always stand with the justice and the people who have been oppressed. And so our role is critical in upholding the justice and fulfilling the trust of those who come to us to place their trust in us. They trust us. They believe in us. So in the interest of time, I know that we are running out of time. We also have some couple of speakers. I'm going to talk about only 3 quick recommendations. Definitely we'll share a lot of resources with you. This is just a conversation start, as Brother Tanveer said. Number 1 is the acknowledgement, and the second one is the referral, and the third one is the resources. Acknowledgement is that we are coming from a South Asian background, many of us, and that culture, our culture is built into not only the South Asian culture, is many cultures have built in a way where we don't talk about what's happening inside the home. So first, coming to a Western country, we have to acknowledge domestic violence exists in all cultures, all ethnic groups. We can't just look at another community, another ethnic community's numbers and say, wow, look at what's happening there. Not really. It happens inside our homes too, but it doesn't come out. The data doesn't show us because people don't report because of stigma and the shame. So it causes emotional, psychological, and physical harm to those who are exposed to that. So as religious leaders, our topmost priority is not our friend, not that community member, not our donor to the mosque or not our donor to the church, but rather safety. The safety is the top priority. Safety of the people who are suffering from domestic violence is our top priority. So number 1, acknowledging that something is happening in our community. The data shows, yes, something is happening. A lot of research have been done. That's the first one. Number 2 is a referral. Referral is where we have to educate ourselves. Yes, we don't have the training. We are not equipped to deal with that. But we can act as triage because they come to us. These 5 out of 10 people are coming to us. We have to act as a triage to let them go and seek the best support they need from the community services. Let Tanveer explain what exists in this community. There are many organizations who are part of Taylor Massey Oak Ridge Community Response Team. All these organizations are providing services, but as faith leaders, how much we know? So we have to referral services. We have to have a complete referral services. Put it in our notice boards, and recognize that these people can go to and seek support from them. And we can always, that because of the trust, we can always be courage enough to tell, I am not the specialized person. Here is the services you have to go. They will provide all the resources you need. And importantly, when the victim coming, we should not blame the victim just because of her poor coping skills. These things are happening. I have seen that happening over and over. I can't go into a lot of personal stories and details of to give that. It's really, I have, as an imam, I have seen that happening in our communities, in other communities, even where I come from, wherever I lived in the last 10, 20 years. I see that happening a lot. So here we have to have a reference to how many churches or how many synagogues or how many mosques have a list of these referral services. We have to keep it up there. This is how we operate. This is a partnership. This is a collaboration. In the end, who is important is the person who is coming to you seeking your services and advice. And the third one is using a toolkit. Using a toolkit in the sense that the resources, sorry. When it comes to resources, the best toolkit I ever came across is what a One Voice team has been putting together. It's a toolkit to support all religious leaders to talk about how to ask questions, how to find out the triggers, how to understand, how to find out whether one person is talking, whether is he an oppressor or is he a victim. All these signs, they are talking about that. I can give you the center circle. They have created a circle for faith leaders. Number 1, speak out. Number 2, provide a safe environment. Number 3, oppose religious justifications. Number 4, learn and assess. And number 5, reject patriarchy. Number 6, connect with community services and believe in, validate, and respect confidentiality. So the last one, they're also talking about 5 R's. 5 R's, which is needed for all religious leaders and faith leaders and community leaders. Recognize, respect, react, refer, and rally. Amazing toolkit. It is in the final works, and soon it will be published, and they are going to give it to all organizations. It's not exclusive to one religion also, or one religion ethnic community. It is inclusive to all religious communities. So with that, I'm going to end. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Walaikum assalam. Shukran, Brother Irshad. Osman, thank you so much for bringing to light what I think is really important for us to acknowledge, that, given Taylor Masjid and Oak Ridge in our communities, that, as you shed light on, that a lot of our populations are very marginalized, and they have patriarchal and cultural stigmatization embedded in our communities, where many of the victims in our community have a fear of being able to speak to someone. And I think it's important that you've acknowledged that you, as a spiritual faith leader amongst so many of our community, have a responsibility and an accountability to be able to be there for them. And I think it's really important that the 3 pillars that you outlined of acknowledgement, of referring and triaging what the issue is, and having a toolkit such as One Voice has produced that you're working with, where you're able to understand triggers or to identify in a conversation who might be the oppressor or the victim. I think it goes without saying that when it comes to communities like ours, where faith leaders are looked to as community leaders in many ways, where they, as you highlighted yourself with personal experiences, that they come to you and to confide in you, that you can be someone that can contribute to this conversation and understanding where there are institutions and barriers that we can improve on. So thank you so much for that. Thank you for your time. And
thank you
for organizing this. And, it goes without saying once again that, you're amongst so many wonderful panelists that, have given their time, and, you do wonderful work on your own by being a khatib and at Dayanpur Islamic Center and other mosques in GTA, as well as consulting for fundraising efforts for many nonprofits and grassroots movements around the country. So I know your impacts as a community leader are not going unnoticed, and thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you.
Moving along, the magnitude of the wonderful panelists that we have just continue, and I'm very, very honored to introduce our next speaker, who will be emphasizing the effectiveness of culturally appropriate support systems for marginalized communities and how important that can be as we continue to talk about domestic violence and the effects of that on mental health. And so we are very honored to have Dr. Nazila Iskandarova be with us tonight. And so without further ado, Dr. Iskandarova, please take it away.
Thank you so much. Thank you for organizers and also participants. And thank you for previous speakers for sharing your wisdom and for powerful message. It was really very powerful. And today I would like briefly speak about the culturally effective and competent mental health services to women who suffer from domestic violence. Definitely, we don't have much time to go into the details, but at least we will be able to look at the definition of cultural competence and cultural safety as well. So cultural competence in general is defined as being aware and also familiar with the impact of domestic violence and interpretations of different resources in specific culture. It also means how different racial and ethnic differences have impact on mental health and physical health of women who are subject to domestic violence. I also would add to this definition that it also means that marginalized population groups who are ethnically and racially similar to a provider, but at the same time, they can be at risk for stigmatization and discrimination. So that simply means that they can be different in other identities and have differences. And these differences in healthcare needs usually or might result in health disparities. When we look at the importance of cultural competency in the healthcare system, definitely we understand from this that cultural competency and safety requires us to provide high quality and also appropriate care. There are different strategies how to increase culturally competent services to women who are subject to domestic violence. I would say that it first starts with training of health providers in terms of different cultures and also religious traditions as well. For example, we need to have ongoing devotion to improve cultural competency and safety requirement in health professional licensing legislation, and also health care providers. They need to add and check how health professionals meet the requirement to improve health professional accreditation standards as well. I think that organizations, they need to develop and also deliver pre-service and in-service training programs to health providers so they understand the cultural competency and safety in healthcare system. In this respect, the most implemented strategy definitely we see in Canadian health system is cultural competency training for healthcare providers. But from our experience, we know that this alone is not enough. We need more than education and trainings. Simply, we need to change environment. And at the heart of this stands critical consciousness. And we should critically evaluate taken for granted power structures in healthcare system. And such critical consciousness encourages us evaluate our cultural assumptions along with becoming competent in the cultures of others. I would say that recently in the literature, we also see the debate if and why cultural safety is more important than cultural competency in order to achieve health equity. So simply culturally sensitive healthcare means a proper access to healthcare services. For example, how many health services, for example, translate their brochures and websites into multiple languages. It also means linguistic competence and improving language barriers. There are moments, and I have seen, interpretation and translation services in hospitals can be life-changing. So I'm so glad that CAMH, Center for Addiction and Mental Health, they have this kind of services. I also think that community engagement is really very important, and extended a role of the community in public health, especially when we provide care to women who come from minority backgrounds, very important. And the question is that how we can involve communities in different aspects of health system. And an example, for example, how they can help us to tackle violence against women, how they can help us to improve women's health and children's health, and how they can help us to improve general lifestyle behaviors, and how they can help us to give health advice. So we can extend this list. I would like to give you an example from one participant statement. It was published in Ruby Latif, Sarah Rodriguez, and Andrew Gall's article. It was titled Muslim Women's Mental Health. And in this article, one participant says, one of the things I noticed is that I don't tell my therapist everything because I think that I'm going to be judged. There is things that I purposely leave out. I basically never talk about my family because I know, or I think I know, what she's going to say about my parents' influence, about cultural influence. One of my closest friends is a journalist, and she did a piece about this a couple of years ago about mental health in Muslims. And she told me about all the interviews she did with service providers, and it was like all my fears were confirmed. So from this example, we know that culturally sensitive care to women who are subject to domestic violence is really very important. And the input from the communities really very, very important, and they really help to improve health delivery. And community engagement approach to health promotion usually stems from the idea that health is shaped by social and physical constructs. In this information in mind, what is important is that how we engage communities and kind of devote ourselves to provide culturally competent and culturally safe healthcare services. Again, I would like to thank all the organizers for this wonderful event, and also previous speakers for sharing their wisdom. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Iskandarova. I think it's really important that, especially Taylor Massey Oak Ridge being home to many marginalized communities, that the communities themselves are not only engaged, but as you were saying, that they feel like they are a part of that process, that it is a very much a bottom-up approach in understanding how to innovate and create support systems that are reflective of what the needs actually are. And so I think you can only do that by engaging with the community, so that you're culturally competent, that you're culturally safe with, you know, what you want to achieve. And so thank you so much for providing your time. I know you're very busy, and that you know, you've published a book titled Muslim Woman, Domestic Violence and Psychotherapy, Theological and Clinical Issues, which was published by Routledge in 2018, and Islamic Spiritual Care by Pandora Press in 2019, and that you are the recipient of many awards, including the prestigious Forum for Theological Exploration Research Award for your study on domestic violence against Muslim women, and many others. And so thank you so much for providing your time and for sharing with us your insight. And hopefully, as you said, we'll continue this conversation. We'll build upon the supports that are needed, that are actually reflective of what the needs are. So thank you so much for the time tonight. Thank you. And as we move along during this wonderful conversation, we are approaching our last set of panelists before we open the floor for them to answer some questions that have been already sent to us from all of you watching us. So thank you for doing that and engaging with us as we do this live as well. You know, we're recording this so that the conversation can continue and this can be looked at afterwards, but we thank everyone that's joined us live today as well. And so before we get to that, we still do have two wonderful panelists left to share their insight and helpful resources with us. Now, in terms of introducing barrier-free resources for newcomer and ethnic populations in the East End, very, very honored to welcome Devi Rangunath and Simone McDonald from the Neighborhood Organization, as they will be sharing some important resources and their insight into their experiences, as well as all that we can continue to do as we talk about these conversations. So please take it away.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much. Thank you to the organizers. What an inspiring session we're involved in here today on a beautiful Sunday afternoon. And it's as I listen to what all the speakers have been saying today, there's one thing that really keeps coming to my mind, and it's the short thing is that doing nothing is not the answer. We have seen the impact on how it can impact our children, ourselves, our own mental health, and even the community at large. And so the fact that we are here today, in my opinion, is really attesting that we are at least one level, that we're being aware that something has to be done. And so we are ready to take the next step, and that is action. We have heard Margaret says, take action. Take action, whatever form that may take. But before we go on to the resources, I just want to highlight, the impact of children. And one of the things that we talk about in healthcare is the social determinants of health. Those are the social things that affect our health and well-being. And we heard Teresa talk about the spectrum of health ranging, from good mental health to bad mental health. But one key thing is early childhood development and the way our children experiences their growth and development really impact on how they are going to be in society and how healthy and making meaningful contribution to our society. So I think, as parents, we owe this to our children to ensure that they have that opportunity to have a really good childhood development. And so I want to say that no door is the wrong door. We have heard this. Knock, whether it's your neighbor, whether it's the school library, no door is the wrong door. The masjids, the system is interconnected. And once we are becoming more and more aware of where the resources are and how we can tap into the resources, we are eventually going to lead at a place where we would want to be for ourselves and for our children. Admittedly, the system could be a little bit difficult to navigate, but that's why we have our systems, our community resources, our social workers, our case managers to help us to navigate the system, to take us to where we want to go. Resources, I heard Dr. Nazila just talk about cultural competency. That could be a barrier if our healthcare providers are not equipped, are not culturally sensitive, are not culturally aware of the diverse culture in our community. We may not feel confident to go to someone who is not well prepared to receive us as a client. However, the good news is, the health system, and Dr. Nazila highlighted it as well, that our system is really acknowledging the diverse culture and are preparing themselves by training of their staff and healthcare workers and so on to become more culturally competent. It's difficult to study all the different cultures, but to be at least be aware and be sensitive that when we have someone of a different culture, how do we acknowledge in a very sensitive way and help them? And so remembering that no door is a wrong door, any door would lead you to where you want to go. We are always on a journey to make sure that we remove barriers such as language, culture, even at the neighborhood organization. If it's a transportation, we try to navigate that for our clients. Confidentiality could be a barrier as well. And so organizations are bound by those things to make sure they're able to provide you. I want to end before I call in Simone, really to say that when we all have so many dreams for ourselves and it's all locked in a box, today, now, take action, reach out, whether it's word of mouth, whether it's the imam, but reach out to the people who can help you so that you can realize your dream. And the neighborhood organization is one such organization. We do have a mental health program, and we have CBT, we have counseling, and I'll ask Simone, if you can take it on from here in terms of walking us through with the resources. Thank you.
Okay, sure. Thank you for having me this evening. So I'll just tell you a little bit about the TNO organization and specifically to our program, which is called Mending Minds. So Mending Minds is a program that it came about. So it's mental health and they do offer you psychotherapists, mental health case managers to support you in whichever way you need. And basically, we don't really have a catchment. And as you know, TNO, we're in that neighborhood, so we're really culturally competent in terms of that. So I'll just read through some organizations that I have here, and then I'll just specify, like, give more details on and some more. So another organization would be Wood Green, Neighborhood Link, East York Youth Center. So the East Metro Youth Center. So the East Metro Youth Center, it's walk-in counseling with no appointment. No appointment is needed, and you can just walk in and get counseling there. Also at Youth Link, it's also a walk-in neighborhood. Neighborhood Link also, and then we have Access Alliance. We have Access Alliance. We have a cross-boundary and ethical mental health organization. And I just want to tell you a little bit more about that organization. So a cross-boundary help racialized individual with mental illness and or addiction who need supports and services with systemic barrier and complex need or experiencing mental health. So with that organization, they do have individuals that they serve are between the ages of 16 and older who have been diagnosed with a serious mental illness. So they have Caribbean dialect, African language, Central Asian language, South Asian language, and Southeast Asian language. So they do have a wide variety of languages there. So the other organization is Afghan Women Counseling, Canadian Center for Victims of Torture, Ong Fook Mental Health Association, Salwoon Afghan Family Education and Counseling, and so these are kind of different. So we have the Muslim Welfare Center that's in Scarborough, Women College Hospital, Refugee Health Clinic, Crisis Refugee Welcome Center, and we have the Afghan Women Organization, and we have the South Asian Women. We have the South Asian Women Center. So the South Asian Women Center. So the South Asian Women's Center, it provides cultural sensitive counseling information and referral in languages that are comfortable with this program funded by the Canadian Women Foundation. The center also works with the community leaders, religious and faith institute to build awareness and cultural sensitivity support for women who are facing abuse. So that's one of another organization. And going down, we have the Toronto Chinese Community Association. And I'm just going to speak a little bit about the free counseling organization that's out there for people who sometimes I know people don't want to necessarily leave their house. So we have an organization that's called Bounce Back. And what Bounce Back is, it's a free skill building program managed by Canadian Mental Health Association. It's designed to help adults 15 plus to manage low mood, mild to moderate depression and anxiety, stress or worry. It's delivered over the phone with a coach and thorough online videos. You will get access to the tools that will support you on your path to mental wellness. And the other one that I just want to talk quickly about is the Mind Beacon. So the Mind Beacon, it's a virtual therapy clinic, and it's free to Ontario residents. The good thing about this is that it's 24 hours, and basically you can access it anytime, and you can have the session for as long as you want. So there's no real set time. You can do it whichever time of the day that you want in the comfort of your home. Okay. And another thing that I looked at was shelters for females if they were if they were going to be fleeing violence. So I looked at the YWCA shelter. I know that that's not necessarily in your area, but it's a really good shelter that has a lot of supports for females. So you're offered your private room for you and your child, lots of support, lots of trauma counseling happening there, and that sort of thing. So yeah, so all of that is happening at the YWCA shelter. It has a community garden, access to clothing bank, and the staff are very warm and very good. So thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for that, Simone, and as well as to Devi. I think it's really important that we're all aware of what is the reality. That is, there are many services being offered, and that you two, being a part of TNO, work hand in hand with many of our adjacent service agencies and organizations, as well as hyper-local cultural organizations, as I'm very much aware, to make sure that all of these experiences are being felt. And just to recap, Devi is joining us as a healthcare professional, and she is the manager of the mental health program at the neighborhood organization. Thank you for your time, Devi. And also, Simone is a graduate of York University, where she completed her Bachelor of Arts in Psychology. She has also earned a social service diploma at Sheridan College, and she is currently working at the neighborhood organization as well as a mental health caseworker. So I can't express my gratitude on behalf of Taylor Massey Oak Ridge and everyone that's tuning in, and everyone that I'm sure will tune in afterwards, to each and every one of you for joining us tonight and for sharing your lived experiences, sharing your bravery, sharing your insight, sharing your powerful yet simple messages to take action, to do your part, to look after your own and one another, and making sure that this is the first of what I think we all hope is many, many conversations that can be had for our communities that are often, considered to be neglected in the traditional paradigm of supports. And so I know that we've got a lot of questions that many of our participants have asked us. And so I'm really excited to be able to ask them to the panel. And I think we're all cordial enough to make sure we know who would like to say what when. And so without further ado, I'd be very happy to facilitate some of those questions. And so I will start off by asking one that was asked early on, and I think is very important for us to try to spell out. So some of my friends told me that I'm not connected to the creator as much, and that's why I feel the way that I feel, and that I should focus on prayers and not think about mental health. Is that true? So I know that's a pretty open-ended question, and I think so I'm not sure who would like to take a stab at that first. But if you'd like to maybe raise your hand and I can just point you out, or Dr. Iskandarova, would you like to take a first stab at this question?
Yeah, I can. So I want to get more information. The person is asking that she cannot get kind of connected to the divine, right? That is the question. And there are different reasons why they don't feel connected to the divine and or higher being, right? So it might be because of a mental health problem or because of interpersonal relationship problems. So always it's important to understand the root cause of this problem. Definitely our relationship with the divine is ongoing and kind of developing. It's not kind of always on kind of on the side of developing. Sometimes we have the ups and downs in our relationship with the sacred, and similarly to other relationships. So in that respect, it's important to understand what are the reasons that prevents us to have a desired level of relationship with the divine. And I personally believe that this kind of questions, when we have this kind of questions, it encourages us to look at life differently. It is a chance that we will have a different level of relationship kind of emerge with maturity and with more wisdom after this challenge. And what is important in this question is that there's yearning for relationship. There's kind of desire to have a deeper relationship with the sacred, and what we understand from the sacred is also important. How do we see the sacred, and what was our relationship before, and what happened that now we are asking these questions. I have seen some people in phase crisis, but I also I have seen people who kind of successfully managed all these phase crisis as well. I am a person who believes in a purification of the soul. When something happens to us through the hardship, I believe there is always an easiness as well, and it is a chance for us to purify our souls. Not because that we think that our soul did something wrong, but it's just simply to improve our soul, the same way we improve our personality, the same way we want to improve our lifestyles, the same way we want to improve our communication style. So in that respect, it's a question for reflection, and it is a good question, beautiful question that helps us to understand the life, why we are here on earth, and what we look for. So thank you for asking that question.
Thank you for answering that. Is there anyone else that would like to add anything onto that before I move on to another theme of questions, if you will?
I'd like to answer it, Tanvir. When I was going through the hard time of the abuse, and it kept on repeating itself, in some way I was angry with God. I felt like God was not there. But at some point in my life, I realized that God was there for me, and He was protecting me, and He was protecting my kids. He just, in some way, found a way to get into my head to let me know it's time to escape. There was a message. I took that message clearly.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for spelling that out and sharing your experience. Moving along, I've got what I think is a very interesting and maybe technical question, but I'm really interested to hear our panelists respond to this. So here it goes. Based on the attachment theory, children need to have a trusting relationship with their parents or caregivers or guardians. If they experience abuse at home, how can they trust the adults in their life? So I open it up to the panel if someone would like to take the first stab in responding to this.
I can answer. I believe that would be a case of the child finding that that trusted adult that's outside of their home, and it might look like a teacher, or it might look like a individual in charge of like their after school program or things like that. And yes, it will be difficult for them to build that attachment with someone else in a healthy way, because we're told that our family and caregivers are the people that we're supposed to look up to. So it may be, and also depending on the child's age, right? It comes out in different ways and may take different shapes and forms. But hopefully through how the curriculum goes sometimes, or maybe the child may pick up on something or find that trusted adult outside of their house, they may be able to share one or two things, and that adult can go through a supportive process with them. But it does get tricky, I know, especially at school.
Thank you for that, Teresa. Is there anyone else who would like to also add on their thoughts and insight? No worries at all. So moving along, got another question that's very reflective of our communities here and the cultural stigmatization that we all fear. So the question /comment is, I don't want to get a diagnosis, but I know that there may be a mental health issue with my loved one. So I think the person asking this is maybe hoping for some insight as to how they can navigate that experience that they're going through. So anyone that would like to maybe address this initially, please go ahead and do so. Margaret, please.
Okay, so I'm very sure that my ex-husband had a mental health condition or two, and he refused to get help, even though I offered to go to counseling with him several times. So I think it's important that if you suspect there's a mental health issue, that you get counseling for yourself first. And very often the person who is helping you is going to be able to navigate through some of the things that you're experiencing and give you some coping strategies, and hopefully suggest, that your partner comes in. But if your partner doesn't want to, be stigmatized with a mental health issue, there's nothing you can do about that. You can't force that person to go to counseling, but you can go to counseling and you can learn some coping strategies to deal with that person's mental health issue. And if push comes to shove, if another person's mental health issue is affecting your mental health, then ultimately you have a decision to make, and that decision may involve leaving the relationship.
Thank you so much for that, Margaret. Would anyone else like to add on to that with their own respective insight?
I can just briefly mention that Margaret is right. In majority cases, people who are abusive, they have mental health problems. They have problems how to regulate the anger. They have communication problems. They can have depression as well. Mental health diagnoses are very, very wide, and they differ from depression to narcissism or different kinds of personality disorder, different kinds of personality disorder, right? So we unfortunately, some people, they don't seek help because of shame and stigma attached to mental health problems, but also domestic violence too. People feel ashamed to reveal what happens within their home. Some men kind of become more abusive and more depressed or more anxious, more ashamed. Then they feel that someone would say that, oh, you what kind of man you are that you cannot control your family. So I think that it's not a responsibility of families and individuals, but it is a responsibility of societies and communities as well, to think that, as Dr. Imam Irshad mentioned, it's not family issue, it is a societal issue, and it is a government issue to manage all these problems as well. So, and how we encourage abusive people to go and seek help for their behavior and take responsibility and feel accountable for their behavior. That is a kind of a message we want to give to them, right? So in this respect, I would say that women shouldn't feel at all responsible for behavior of their husbands. They shouldn't feel guilty that if I leave my husband, they will be more depressed or anxious and or feel more angry. It's not their responsibility that the husbands have mental health problems. It doesn't give any excuse that they should be abusive towards the wives and the children, right? So that is the things they need to understand. If they have the problem, how as a society we create a shame-free and stigma-free communities and the societies that abusive people they seek help, they recognize the symptoms of mental illness. It is for their benefit too. It's not only for benefit of their wives or their children. It is for their benefit. So who doesn't want to live happily? We believe that we come to this world only once. Why not to enjoy the life? So that is the thing, we need to enjoy the life and live peacefully with other people. And the peace starts within us. Peace starts within our families and in our relationships. So we need to give this message to them that they shouldn't feel ashamed for their mental health problem or domestic abuse. If that happens, the message is that you should seek help for that.
Thank you so much for that. It's very, very profound, and also just a lot of what Margaret and Dr. Iskandarova said is, I think, it needs to be said out loud, right? That's why you have these conversations. So thank you for responding to that. And before I get to our last question that I'd like to highlight for the panel to try to respond to, I do want to acknowledge that for those of us joining us, that as you can already tell, we are over the time that we were planning to have this conclude by. But as you're also aware, we had some technical difficulties that kept us from starting on time. So if you'll allow us, we will wrap this up shortly. But thank you for those of you who joined us and have stuck with us through this important conversation. And so I would like to end the Q&A on one very interesting comment, which I appreciate, because it doesn't have to be questions, but this could also be a workshop where those joining us are providing their experiences and comments of the realities. And so we have one participant acknowledging that the legal process and systems and the courts can be very scary to navigate, and that many are fearful of dipping their toes and wondering if that is an avenue where they can, try to achieve and get further assistance and support. And so they're acknowledging that it is important for organizations like TNO and like the agencies involved with TMO CRT to help with them. But I'm wondering if anyone on the panel would like to address the difficulties that many marginalized communities or victims in general have navigating the legal systems, as it is quite daunting to do so. So I'd be open to hear if anyone would like to take a stab into providing their insight.
A quick comment with Tanveer. It also comes back to that cultural background where we are coming from, right? Many of the countries where we come from, legal services are not, free legal services are not available at all. There are no pro bono services. There's no social services like what we have in Canada. So we come with an understanding that these services are not available. I mean, I can't go to a lawyer. I can't pay this much amount of money. I can't afford to go. So again, as I said, that we all have a duty to educate our community. There are services available where your confidentiality will be fully protected. You will not be shamed. You will not be judged. You can go and get the services you need. So that's my only comment.
I would like to mention on this, because when I work with women who are subject to domestic violence, they complained of the complications they faced when they sought help, let's say from legal aid or other lawyers. The legal process takes years and years, and sometimes right now we are helping one woman, and she cannot get child custody and child support as well. The reason is that the legal system is very, very slow to respond to her situation. And she got the custody of the child, but still she cannot get child support simply because her ex refused to file tax. And if she doesn't file the tax, she's not eligible to get the child support. And so Canada Revenue Agency, for example, says that your ex needs to file the tax. Without that, you cannot get child support. And we see complications, and how we are going to help these women who face legal barriers when they seek help in divorce and in separation. I'm so glad that Canadian Council of Muslim Women and National Council of Jewish Women, they have legal services, and they help women in illegal matters as well. So these are really very important. One of the complications also comes from the fact that let's say that they have the shared property. If they have the shared property, then the money at the settlement, they have to pay back. The woman, they need to pay back to legal aid. So we also need to think about that and improve legal services for women. And in another situation, for example, a woman can complain, but we don't have enough legal support or shelter support for women who face domestic violence. I am sure that you heard the story of 28 or 27 years old Brittany. She was a resident of Mississauga, and in March or 2020 or 2021, she has been killed by her ex in front of her two small children. And by that time, her friend told that she sought help from police, from legal services, and she was turned down by 4 shelters. Four times she was turned down by shelters because they told her that there's no enough space in the shelter to give to her. And the consequence was that she has been murdered. So we need to take into consideration the seriousness of legal support. Legal support is crucial. It gives power women, it gives voice to them. And without this kind of support, it is impossible to empower them. So that is why we tell them that speak up, stand up for yourself. But how is this woman going to stand up for themselves without a proper legal service? So that is why I think that there is a need to improve the legal aid system, especially when in cases of domestic violence.
Thank you so much for that. It's really important that, along with supports that are there for communities, that those legal institutions are also cognizant of what the needs are and how they can be best utilized. Thank you to all of you for participating in the Q&A and sharing your wisdom once again with us. I'm happy to say that Diana has graciously offered her time to conduct a final prayer with us tonight. And so without further ado, I pass it over to her so she can do so.
O divine light, shine on all of us today and always. We give you thanks that you call us out for silence to name hidden domestic violence so many face. Today, we pray for all those women who, despite suffering from violence, continue to care for families and children, to nurture and prepare food, earn a living, and offer support to others. We pray for transformation of our societies, which often find it easier to judge the victims of violence than to solve the problems of injustice. We pray that women's voices may be heard and taken into account in all peace and reconciliation work. We pray for transformation that they may overcome violence in all its forms and to learn to celebrate our diversity and interdependence. We look forward to the age of peace when violence is banished. Both women and men are able to love and to be loved, and the work and wealth of our world is justly shared. In your divine light, we pray.
Thank you so much for that, Diana. I think that is a very appropriate way to close off what has been an evening of important and also difficult conversations. But I think we can all agree that it is the first step for many in the Taylor Massey Oak Ridge community to be inspired by all of your experiences, by all of your struggles and your wisdom, so that we can carry on with being more resilient as a community. And so, to close, I want to thank each and every one of you, our panelists, for providing your time, organizing your thoughts. I know there's so much to say given the time that we had to sadly allot to you all. But thank you to you all for joining us tonight. I would like to particularly thank the team behind this wonderful seminar, including our producer behind the scenes working on the technical jungle that it is, organizing a live stream. Thank you to Karma for facilitating the questions. Thank you to my co-chair of the TMO-CRT, Razia, for organizing a lot of what was successful for today. Thank you to Anila, Jennifer, and Catherine for all of the hard work of the weeks that led up to tonight. And last but not least, thank you to everyone that joined us tonight to be with us, to hear from one another, and that hopefully this will help us to continue on what I would think is great momentum for our communities, to know that there are so many allies and that there are many experiences that many can share, and that there are many ways that we can build up a resilient community, and that we can talk about important and difficult things by being cognizant that many communities have often been left out of that conversation. So I don't want to keep anyone from their Sunday evenings. A huge round of applause again to the panelists and for everyone joining us. And thank you so much, everyone. Thank you.